After the end of Kamen Rider Black RX, it was some time before Kamen Rider as a franchise got back on its feet. Black RX turned out to be quite popular, just like its original series, but they couldn't figure out a way to follow it up. They tried with the Shin Kamen Rider movie, not that one, this one. Yeah, I know, right? Not great, which ended up being a commercial flop. Two other Kamen Rider movies were also made in hoping that they would become serialized TV shows. Those were Kamen Rider ZO and Kamen Rider J, who also weren't that successful, but did eventually gain a cult following. But after the unfortunate death of the creator of Kamen Rider, Shotaro Ishinomori, the Kamen Rider franchise was kinda up in the air. Could they still make Kamen Rider series without the guidance of Ishinomori? When in the year 2000, and with the end of the Showa era and the beginning of the Heisei era in Japan, the creators decided to revolutionize Kamen Rider and take the series in a new direction. And with that idea in mind, the start of the Heisei era of Kamen Rider was born, which would end up being very successful in comparison to what they did in the 90s. Today, my dear viewers, I'm going to explain just what made the Heisei and Reiwa eras work so well, and how these series forged a new identity for Kamen Rider as a franchise. Now, just like in my Showa era video, I'm especially not going to be talking about every single series from these eras, because there are so many of them and they are all so different from each other, so explaining all of them would just be too much. But I will try my best to talk about why each series I mentioned is important to the era that they are in. So without further ado, my dear viewers, sit back, relax as I explain the appeal of Kamen Rider from the Heisei and Reiwa eras. Now, in my Showa era video, I broke down the 4 elements of the Kamen Rider formula and how each series had a different take on it. Well, in the Heisei era, we can just throw that notion right out the window. There is no Kamen Rider formula in the Heisei and Reiwa eras. Now, that doesn't mean that there are no overall tropes and ideas that are shared between each series, because there definitely are. But unlike in the Showa era, with each series in the Heisei and Reiwa eras, you really don't know exactly what type of series you're going to get. So how I'm going to be breaking it down in this video is first I'm going to briefly talk about the overall presentation of these new eras and how they differ from the Showa era. Next, I'll talk about some of the writers and what writers in general mean in the Heisei and Reiwa eras. And last but not least, I'm going to be talking about some of the concepts for each series, just to see how cool and off the wall some of these series can get. So first off, let's talk about how the presentation of Kamen Rider has changed over these eras. When I turned on the first episode of Kamen Rider Kuga, I was shocked. I was absolutely flabbergasted by the fact that a Kamen Rider show was in widescreen. I was just so used to the Showa era of 4:3 that 16:9 just felt like whiplash. But more than just the aspect ratio changed when it came to the presentation of Heisei Kamen Rider. Obviously in the year 2000 and beyond, how TV shows were directed and shot changed over time, and that definitely affected how Kamen Rider was shot and produced as well. If you're familiar with how TV shows looked back in the early 2000s, Kamen Rider also followed through on this presentation, and overall, I would say that it works. It definitely fits the tone of what you would think when it comes to modernized Kamen Rider, especially when comparing it to the Showa era. Also in some of these series, the showrunners took some risks in how some of the scenes were shot. Sometimes they would use a fisheye lens, they've done POV shots, and a myriad of other production techniques that you would have never seen in the Showa era. So with that stuff out the way, the two main ways with how the presentation of Kamen Rider changed in the modern era is with the series becoming serialized rather than episodic, and the introduction of CGI being used much more frequently. Back in the Showa era, series were episodic, meaning that each episode had its own story with its own antagonists, mainly being the different monsters that the Kamen Riders would fight. The Kamen Rider would defeat the monster and then repeat for next week's episode. Starting in the Heisei era, the series started to become more ongoing serialized shows, where it has one continuous story that is broken up into arcs, much like an anime. Now yes, there is still the Monster of the Week element present in these shows, but the events surrounding them are continuous. This adds a new element to Kamen Rider, allowing these new different shows to explore various themes and flesh out the world that these series take place in. This obviously also affects the concepts of each series over time, but more on that later. Also, with the use of CGI in Kamen Rider, the fight scenes, henshins, and special finishing moves all have a more modern look to them in comparison to the deceptive editing used in the Showa era. Now to be fair, this is CGI in the 2000s, from Japan, so they don't look amazing, and there are still elements of deceptive editing in the Heisei and Reiwa eras, just not as many. But yes, with the use of CGI, the attacks can look even bigger and much more explosive than they could before. It certainly makes the fights become bigger in scale and of more epic proportions. It also makes the henshins look even cooler than they did before. What I liked about the henshins in the Showa era was that due to the limited budget and resources, they had to make each henshin unique, albeit simple. In the Heisei and Reiwa eras, there's a lot more freedom in how the henshins can happen and what they can look like. Also, a little side note, I just love how the belts, or drivers that they have become known as, make little sounds and even have jingles associated with them. It adds a lot more personality to the show, especially with them being so varied. Some of my favorites being the Fi's driver, the O's driver, the Revice driver. Man, that jingle would just be stuck in my head forever. And my number one favorite being the W driver. CGI being used definitely gives a unique aesthetic to the Heisei and Reiwa eras. Even if the quality of the CG doesn't change much over the years, it still makes the shows a lot more fun to watch. Now let's talk about some of the writers and what it means to be a writer in the modern era. In the Showa era, it was pretty clear cut what it meant to be a writer. You are a protector of the weak against evil and a defender of justice, striving for a world to have a better tomorrow. But that notion has changed somewhat over the years, especially in the Heisei and Reiwa eras. In the modern era, what it means to be a Kamen Rider pretty much changes from series to series. The Kamen Riders still fight monsters and against evil, kinda, but the reasons for doing so are much more complex this time around. Not to say that there are no riders who fight for justice. Kamen Rider Kuga is a great example of a character who fights to protect the weak. Yusuke Godai, the protagonist of Kuga, is essentially a wanderer traveling across Japan. He is a lot more lighthearted and kind of goofy for a Kamen Rider protagonist. I don't think we've seen a rider with his temperament before in the Showa era, so there is definitely a good change of pace. He kind of reminds me of a puppy, who always looks on the bright side. It will go on to influence the personality of several other riders down the line. But after he dons the Kuga belt and fights against the unidentified life forms, which we later learn are called the Grongi, Yusuke fights them on the behalf of protecting innocent lives. Kuga is definitely a pure Kamen Rider through and through. As the era goes on, and with the addition of multiple riders in each series, what it means to be a Kamen Rider changes dramatically. For example, in Kamen Rider Ryuki, the Kamen Riders in that series are put into a battle royale where only one of them can survive. Our main character, Shinji Kido, one of our first real himbo riders, is forced into this fight after he discovers one of the decks that makes him a Kamen Rider. In Ryuki, the Kamen Riders have to not only fight against monsters in what they call a mirror world, in order to power up their own monsters that give the riders their abilities, they also have to fight against other riders, so that they are the last one standing. At first, Shinji wants to stop the fighting. He doesn't want to fight against his fellow Kamen Riders, because he saw them as people who are going through the same thing that he was. But further down the line, he realizes that some of these riders cannot be saved, and he must put them down. This constant struggle that Shinji finds himself in is what defines him as a writer, and definitely makes him one of the most interesting writers to watch. The more I go through these different series, I realize that the actual question of what it means to be a writer, at least in this era, has no real definitive answer. The circumstances and the personalities of the writers make space for the writers themselves to come up with their own reasons, whether it's to fight to protect the weak, or they were forced into it, or they became a writer by happenstance, or they were fated to become a writer, or any other reason. The writers forge their own path into becoming the writer that they choose to be. It's one of the most interesting parts of the modern era of Kamen Rider, because just like the concepts of the shows, it's also a mystery about what kind of writers you get as you watch each series. That is the element that certainly sets the modern era apart from the Showa era. Alright, it's finally time to talk about the concept of the different series in the Heisei and Reiwa eras. I'll just say this up front that this will be the longest portion of the video. And also, like I said before, I'm not going to be talking about every single series, because that would just be way too long. This is where the Showa era and the modern era diverge the most. Like I said before in my Showa era video, there was a formula in those series that set up expectations of what those series was going to be like going forward. That's not really the case here in the modern era. But there are still some trends that are shared between many of the different series in the modern era. But in order to talk about those trends, you have to talk about the one that started it all. We have to start with Kamen Rider Kuga. Kamen Rider Kuga, out of all of the Heisei era series, is actually the most like a Showa era Kamen Rider series. There is only one Kamen Rider, and he fights the different monsters in order to protect the innocent. Actually, Kamen Rider Kuga is the only series in the modern era to have only one writer, setting it apart from the many other Heisei era series. But this didn't stop Kuga from influencing the rest of the modern era, because it certainly did. The basic premise of Kamen Rider Kuga is pretty simple. In ancient times, monsters called the Grongi killed and terrorized the Linto, or humans of that time, until a Linto warrior called Kuga defeated them and sealed them away. In modern-day Japan, a group of researchers found and excavated an ancient cave, thus breaking the seal and releasing the Grongi once again. Our protagonist Yusuke Godai, who is a friend of one of the researchers, puts on this ancient belt that he seems to be having visions about and transforms into Kamen Rider Kuga in order to stop and reseal the Grongi for good. Gone are the days of evil organizations looking to take over the world. Now the Kamen Rider has to deal with ancient forces that have reawakened. This is definitely an element that the Heisei era uses quite a bit. There's always some ancient mystical force that reawakens or reappears, and the Kamen Riders have to stop it. This trope definitely came from Kuga. Also, and this may be a bit of a shock for people who are familiar with the Showa era, but the Kamen Rider isn't a cyborg anymore. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't think any of the Kamen Riders, main or secondary in the modern era, are cyborgs. It's like they dropped that element completely. I wonder why. Well anyways, Kuga, alongside being a serialized show instead of an episodic one, the mystery element of the show is very prominent. Many parts of the show is just finding out what the Grongi actually are, and what Kuga is as well. The Grongi are certainly shrouded in mystery for a lot of the series, with one of our main characters finding out about them bit by bit throughout the story. Speaking of the Grongi, one element about them that has stuck around from the Showa era is that they can disguise themselves as humans. This trope also continues in the other modern era shows, but it's not as prominent as it was in the Showa era. Now the main element that Kuga brings to the table that is used in every Kamen Rider series after it is that the Kamen Rider has multiple forms. Kuga has a ton of different forms, from its 4 base forms, to the upgrade for those forms, to its ultimate forms. Kuga really set the tone for Kamen Riders having multiple transformations. Some Showa era riders have multiple transformations, like Kamen Rider X and Stronger having power-up forms, and Kamen Rider Black having the bio forms. But it was certainly done differently, and it was much more prominent in Kuga and many of the other modern era riders. Kamen Rider Ryuki is the first Kamen Rider series to take a big leap forward when it comes to the storyline and concept for the show. It's really like no other Kamen Rider series before it. Basic premise of Ryuki is that there are 13 card decks for 13 Kamen Riders. Each Kamen Rider is to make a contract with a monster in the mirror world. With this contract, they get special abilities. They must then fight other monsters to strengthen their own, so that they may use that strength against other Kamen Riders, so that they are the last one standing. Yup, that's right. Kamen Rider Ryuki is a Battle Royale series, and in my opinion, one of the best Kamen Rider series. Our main protagonist is the lovable himbo Shinji Kido, who is unwittingly wrapped up in this fight after he discovers one of the card decks while he was researching a case to report on. This setup is way different from the other Kamen Rider series before or even after it. Ryuki really took the series in a bold new direction. This series also added the trope of using cards to gain different abilities and weapons. For example, using the Sword Vent card, you can conjure a sword to fight with, or Trick Vent allows you to make multiple copies of yourself. This card motif was actually inspired by Yu-Gi-Oh! Since it was so popular at the time. The use of a mirror world was also a really cool idea for the show. The monsters can only be attacked in this mirror world, but they affect things in the real world. It's a smart concept that allows for huge battles without having to destroy the city every week. My favorite thing about Ryuki though is how the different riders interact with each other and trying to find out who the next rider is. Shinji is thrust into this fight, but he meets a fellow Kamen Rider named Ren. Ren, very reluctantly, teaches Shinji about the mirror world and how to contract with monsters. This starts a rivalry between Shinji and Ren that lasts the entire series. Even though they are rivals, since only one person can make it to the end, they frequently partner up when fighting against new Kamen Riders and fighting against new monsters in the mirror world. As the series goes on, you see that every Kamen Rider has their reason for fighting, and these different reasons leading the Kamen Riders to clash are some of my favorite parts of the show. Ren may seem like a standoffish edgelord, but he's in this fight for a reason. And Shinji, as he learns and grows, finds his reason for fighting as well. Shinji at first wants all the Kamen Riders to get along and not fight, but when he realizes that he has no choice, he steals his resolve and does what's right. This struggle and many of the other elements of this show definitely make Ryuki stand out, and it certainly deserves credit for pushing Kamen Rider in a vastly different direction. Kamen Rider Kabuto is another really cool entry in the Kamen Rider series. The premise of this show is that 7 years before the start of the series, a meteorite hit and destroyed Shibuya. After this event, shape-shifting monsters called worms started to attack Japan. Ever since then, an organization called Zect was created to fight the worms and figure out where they came from. This series has a different tone to it than some of the other earlier shows. One of the main reasons for that has to do with the main character, Tendo. Soji Tendo is a very different kind of protagonist than a lot of the other Kamen Riders, even from the Showa era. Tendo is very calm and self-assured. He believes he can get through any situation because he walks the path of heaven. He said that his grandmother told him that he who walks the path of heaven will rule over everything. And he has certainly taken that phrase to heart. He comes across as cool and confident, but that can also lead him to seem cocky and arrogant. But he certainly has the sauce to back it up. This cool, calm, and collected attitude certainly bleeds into his fighting style as well. He trained for 7 years to be a Kamen Rider, and that certainly shows when he is fighting worms. Every movement that he does is well thought out and decisive. His clean strikes lead Tendo to fight with the elegance that no other Kamen Rider has. His fighting style also leads him to not get beat up as much as some of the other riders. He's a lot like Kamen Rider Stronger from the Showa era in that respect. Tendo is definitely one of the reasons why Kamen Rider Kabuto stands out. Some other reasons are the fights, especially when the monsters clock up. So in this show, the worms have a base form that all look the same, which is pretty cool looking in my opinion. Then they are able to molt into a stronger form that all look different from one another. When they molt, they have the ability to clock up, meaning that they can move faster than the eye can see and defeat entire squads of people. Usually the Zect soldiers who always seem to get their asses beat in this show. But anyways, in order to combat that, Zect created the rider system. Once someone henshins, they have two forms, one with armor on and one where they cast off the armor. In this cast off form, riders can also clock up to fight the molted worms. These clock up fights are so cool looking. Even though they came out years ago, the quality of the fights still hold up today. Easily one of the coolest parts of the show. The various riders of this show also make it stand out as well, with some of the characters becoming riders for good moral reasons, like Kagami, who is essentially our second protagonist, who is more like some of the past Kamen Riders, fighting so that no one else gets hurt or killed, or for more nefarious reasons, like So Yagaruma, who started out working for Zect, but after failing and being ousted, he takes a deal to be a Dark Rider and becomes Kamen Rider Kidcopper. Like in Ryuki, I like how these different riders interact with each other. It's always interesting to watch whether they are friend or foe. Ever wanted to go back in time using a really cool looking train? Well, Kamen Rider Den-No is the show for you. Kamen Rider Den-No definitely takes Kamen Rider in a bold new direction with its concept and time traveling plot. This has never been done before in Kamen Rider, so for this show to be so ambitious, they really did a good job with it. The basic premise of this series is that our main protagonist Ryotaro Nogami, after a series of really bad encounters, finds a strange looking train pass. After that, he gets possessed by a monster called the Imogen, who are monsters from the future who are trying to change events in the past for their own benefit. After meeting a mysterious girl and being attacked, he uses the pass that he found to turn into Kamen Rider Den-No, thus defeating the monster. Now, Ryotaro uses the Denliner, a train that can travel through time, to stop the Imogen from getting their way. This show is all over the place and I really enjoy it for that. What makes this series stand out is just how far they take the whole time travel concept. From the basic Back to the Future stuff like seeing a younger version of your parents and yourself, to having small changes disrupt the timeline so much that the present time gets changed dramatically. Pretty much any time travel concept that is out there is covered by Den-No, and I think that that's pretty cool. The Imogens themselves are also super cool as well. The Imogens are beings without physical form because of an event that erased their timeline. So in the present day, well, the present day of 2007, we make contracts and possess the bodies of different humans, manifesting themselves by using that person's imagination, leading to some great looking designs. This concept, alongside with the time travel, makes Den-No one of the more interesting Kamen Rider series in the Heisei era. I also wanted to quickly mention Kamen Rider Kiva as well. Kiva is a cool series for two reasons. One being the dual plotline dealing with the main character Wataru and his father, also with the gothic aesthetic that the series went for. Seeing how the different mysteries unfurl as we go back and forth between the timelines was a pretty cool idea to see how it came to fruition. I really enjoyed the gothic elements of the series as well. In order to henshin, Wataru has to let his driver bite him, and then it turns into a bat that allows him to henshin. His rider kick is also really cool looking. The monsters in this series are called the Fenrir's, and they have some of the coolest monster designs in Kamen Rider. Yes, I said it. While Kiva isn't always looked at fondly by most Kamen Rider fans, there are certainly many qualities about it that are awesome and make it stand out. So yeah, Kamen Rider Kiva, it's pretty cool. Alright, here comes the big one. We have our first anniversary series in the modern era, and that is Kamen Rider Decade. or decade. Decade starts off running and pretty much stays like that for its entire short run. The concept for this one is off the wall, so check this out. So in Kamen Rider Decade, all of the past 9 Heisei Rider worlds are on a collision course together. In order to stop the 9 worlds from destroying the 10th one, our protagonist Tsukasa Kadoya is tasked with becoming Kamen Rider Decade. Using the different rider cards which allow him to turn into the past Heisei Riders, he goes to each of the 9 worlds to destroy them, thus gaining the title of Destroyer of Worlds. Yeah, this series is nuts. It's definitely a better watch if you've seen the past 9 Kamen Rider series, but on its own it's a pretty cool tribute to these past Heisei Riders. But this is where we open up a whole other can of worms with the ARs, or Another Riders. So as Decade goes through each world, he finds the original Kamen Riders of that world, but not as we currently know them, as these are Another Riders, which are the same characters played by completely different actors in a different separate universe? Yeah, it can get pretty confusing. I was definitely taken aback when I saw a completely different younger actor playing Kuga. I was very confused. But this whole AR concept definitely makes Decade stand out in an interesting way, so I can't knock it. Decade is a weird series, but a great one nonetheless. You'll definitely feel nostalgic if you're familiar with these past riders. The next series I just gotta mention, not only because it's great and unique, but it's also one of my favorites. Next up is Kamen Rider W, or Double. The premise of this series is that in the city of Futo, this rich family called the Sonozaki family are selling this USB-like device called Gaia Memories. With an attachment to the skin, you can use the Gaia Memory to transform into a monster called a Dopant, gaining superhuman abilities. After the death of his detective mentor, Shotaro Hidari teams up with his mysterious partner Philip to investigate cases caused by Dopants. They also use Gaia Memories to transform into Kamen Rider Double, making Dopants count up their sins as they figure out the different mysteries of the city. This series is just great. One of the main things I enjoy about Double are the character interactions. Each character is weird and quirky in their own way, which may put people off at first, but as the series goes on, these quirks become more endearing and adds so much more to the characters. Shotaro acts like he's this hard-boiled detective, willing to do anything to get the job done, but he's actually a big softie. Philip has all the knowledge on Earth in his head, but he can't access it all at once, so there are still basic things that he doesn't understand, especially when it comes to interacting with others. The way they bounce off of each other is really fun to watch. The Dopants are a really cool addition as well, which actually starts off a trend for later Kamen Rider series. Since the Dopants aren't aliens or ancient beings, they're just humans. So finding out why the Dopants are doing what they are doing in each case makes each episode unique and engaging. Well, each 2 episodes, since each case lasts about 2 episodes. They really go hard on the double concept in the show. Anyways, figuring out who each Dopant is and what they want leads to the show exploring multiple themes throughout its episodes, and that is certainly right up my alley. The double suit is also really cool as well, and changes depending on the Gaia memory that is being used. The fact that Shotaro and Philip are fused together as a single Kamen Rider leads to the show exploring that in different various ways, from having Philip's body being lugged around, or in danger as his consciousness is in the Kamen Rider suit, or having Shotaro or Philip vying to take full control over the suit, and many other ways that you wouldn't get in any other Kamen Rider series. Also, real quick, speaking of the drivers, I love that they say what they are each time they are being used. Those names really get stuck in your head as you watch the show. If Cyclone Joker is not stuck in your head after you watch this show, there is definitely something wrong with you. They are definitely the coolest driver sounds in my opinion. As the series goes on and you find out more about the different mysteries of the show, it really draws you in like no other Kamen Rider series. Double is such a unique series that I definitely recommend people give a try. On to another one of my favorites. Next up is Kamen Rider O's. Yeah, apparently in Kamen Rider world, if you say a letter or number 3 times, you have to say it as one word. Just look at 555 being Fies, and again here with O's. Anyways, O's is really great for many reasons. Some of them being that the basic premise of the story is simple yet very effective in driving the story forward and feeding great character moments. The premise of O's is that 800 years before the start of the story, these beings called Greeds were trying to take over the world. These beings are made up of metals, with their bodies being made of cell metals and their core being made up of core metals. But the Greeds were defeated long ago by a warrior called O's, sealing them away. At the start of the series, our main protagonist Eiji Hino, an aloof wanderer who travels Japan with his trusty underwear by his side, gets caught up in the fight for metals as the Greeds reawaken, making a pact with the Greed called Ankh, who is just a disembodied talking arm until he takes over a police officer's body. Ankh gives Enji a belt and 3 core metals so he can turn into Kamen Rider O's, defeating Yummies, which are monsters made up of metals that manifest from human desires, and taking core metals from the other greeds that have reawakened. This is such a cool concept for a Kamen Rider show. What really draws me to this show are 1, the characters, and 2, the setup for the story and how it plays out. Eiji is such a great protagonist because he has such a bright and cheery outlook on life, and that's because he's been through so much sorrow in his past. Eiji is a traveler, and on one of his travels he went to Africa and befriended a little girl there, but because of a civil war, the girl was unfortunately killed, and Eiji couldn't do anything to save her. This event is what drives Eiji to try and protect as many people as he can, and do his best as Kamen Rider O's. Ankh, on the other hand, doesn't care about people at all. He just wants to gain as many medals as he can so he can get back to his full form. This personality clash makes up a lot of the drama that happens throughout the show. Seeing how Eiji's optimism starts to rub off on Ankh as the show goes on is really rewarding to watch. The Yummies, the main monsters outside of the greeds in this show, add to the drama as well. Because like I said before, they are created by human desires, so depending on the person and which greed created the Yummy, it leads to different situations that challenge both Eiji's and Ankh's worldviews, and that is certainly one of the best parts of the show. Throwing a monkey wrench into all of this, you also have the Kogami Foundation, led by Kosei Kogami, who are humans who decided to collect metals as well, and even created a whole system of gadgets and machinery using metals. Finding out the mystery behind the foundation alongside fighting against the greeds makes Kamen Rider O's a standout series in the Heisei era. Okay, so real quick, I just wanted to mention another series before we get to the Reiwa era, and that series is Kamen Rider Gaim. The reason why I want to talk about Gaim is that this series is so off the wall and it gets taken in directions that you would never expect that it just needs to be talked about. Problem is, I have no idea how to explain the story of Gaim, like at all, and if I try I feel like I'll do a really bad job. So I'm gonna try it out anyways. So this town gets turned into this feudal Japanese castle town because the company essentially just bought all of the land in the area, so now living in this town sucks. So to make it not suck as much, there are these dance groups that start to form in order to cheer people up. Alongside this, there's this game that uses these devices called lock seeds to summon demons from different dimensions. But if you use a driver with a lock seed, you can become a Kamen Rider. But in this show, these Kamen Riders have to fight each other so that one of them has the chance to go into this forest to obtain the power of this legendary fruit that apparently gives them ultimate power or a wish or something like that. And it goes even crazier from there. I guess this is what happens when again everyone's life should be sadness or Ibuchi writes your story. It's a great show, but it's a lot to get into. And like I said, it goes to some really crazy places that you would not expect. So yeah, that's Kamen Rider Gaim. On to the Reiwa era. The Reiwa era is pretty much the same as the Heisei era, which is why it's in this video in the first place. But yeah, it had a lot of interesting ideas going into it, especially with the first series in the era, Kamen Rider 01. I really enjoyed this series. It's sort of a mixture of a few different ideas that were used in some of the Heisei era series, but taken in a new direction. The series follows Aruto Hiden, a failing stand-up comedian living in a world with AI-controlled robots called Humagears. These Humagears look like people and can learn just about anything you can teach them. They are used to help people in various ways. Well, it turns out that the creator of Humagears just died, and his grandson is Aruto, who he just left the company to. Alongside this, a terrorist organization called MetsubouJinrai.net are corrupting Humagears, causing them to attack humans. To counteract this, Aruto dons the 01 driver left to him by his grandfather to fight back against this threat. The premise for this series is really interesting, since we get to see both sides of how Humagears can help people, and when corrupted, how they can hurt them. The inclusion of Humagears leads to themes about how AI can affect society at large, and if this power and influence is put into the wrong hands, what the repercussions are. Aruto is a great protagonist as well. Sure, he has his silly funny side when he's telling these really bad pun jokes, but he is always willing to put himself on the line, not only to save other people, but to save Humagears as well. It's an interesting take on AI that I haven't really seen before, and that certainly makes 01 stand out. Kamen Rider Revice is another super enjoyable watch with a great premise to it. So in Revice, every person has an inner demon that you can make a contract with the use of these devices called Vice Stamps. Our main character Iki Igarashi, who works at a bathhouse with his family, is able to see his inner demon without a stamp. A cult of demon worshippers called Deadmans are creating monsters by giving people Vice Stamps to make deals with their inner demon. To combat this, Iki reluctantly takes the responsibility of using the Revice driver to use his inner demon to fight against the other demons. When using the driver, he turns into Kamen Rider Revi, and his inner demon Vice turns into Kamen Rider Vice. Together, they are Kamen Rider Revice, taking out demons and putting a stop to Dead Man's plans. One of my favorite things about this show is how Iki and Vice play off of each other. Iki is kind, yet serious about his work and his family. But Vice is goofy and all over the place. And that personality clash really works great as they have to work together to fight the Deadmans. Iki having to reel Vice in from getting too vicious or trying to eat people leads to a lot of great moments. This show also has a lot to do with family, and how through anything being with your family will help you out the most. This theme was definitely in need since this came out while we were still going through the pandemic. The deal with the devil theme also leads to some interesting themes about human desire and how far people are willing to go to get what they want. Some of the people who took the deal even learned from their mistakes. Revice is also an anniversary series, so in doing that, some of the Revice forums are based off of past writers, which I thought was a really cool idea to pay homage to these past writers. Yes, I quite enjoyed Revice. I definitely recommend it. Alright, now onto the newest series. Well, as of the recording of this video, Kamen Rider Geats. Geats is probably my favorite of the Reiwa era so far. It brings a lot of new ideas to the table and executes on each of them very well. The concept behind it is also awesome as well. Geats takes place in a world where there are games called the Desire Grand Prix, where different people are selected to become Kamen Riders. The riders are tasked with defeating monsters called Yamato and saving people. In doing so, the riders gain points, and whoever has the most points after all of the games wins the right to recreate the world in any way that they wish. Our main protagonist Ace Ukyo just won the Desire Grand Prix and recreates the world where he is an incredibly famous celebrity, but the games still continue, and as Ace goes back into the Grand Prix, he will face various challenges on his way to the top. Ace is a very interesting protagonist. He reminds me a lot of Tendo from Kabuto actually. Ace is very self-assured and is confident that he'll win the games every time. Even though he has this cocky exterior, he is still a kind person who is willing to help others in need. Ace is certainly a different flavor of writer, but that's what makes him all the more entertaining to watch. This is another series where the premise is very simple yet effective. It's really easy for people to understand what's going on, so it just kind of throws us right into it as the riders are picked and the games commence. The games usually come down to taking out Yamato in various ways, whether that be in waves like the zombie episodes, escaping from labyrinths with monsters in them, or playing sports. With each game, the mysteries of what the Desire Grand Prix even is and who joins these games start to be questioned. And as we peel the layers back, it leads to some very interesting conclusions. Now the series isn't done yet, so we don't know everything, but what we've learned so far certainly has kept me engaged and wanted to know more. Getting to know why each writer wants to change the world also keeps the show interesting, as we see them go through situations that call into question what they want, or if they are willing to do what it takes to win the games. All of these things together make Geats one of the most entertaining Kamen Rider series to watch. Man, that was a lot, huh? Even though I talked about all those series, I barely even scratched the surface of the Heisei and Reiwa eras. Just because I didn't talk about a certain series in this video, doesn't mean that I don't like it. It's just that there was so much to cram into this video, so please forgive me if I didn't talk about your favorite series. For series that I recommend, to be honest with you, you can pretty much start with any of these series if you find them interesting. Just look through all of them, see what catches your eye, and just start there. My personal favorites from the Heisei era are Kamen Rider Kabuto, Kamen Rider O's, Kamen Rider W, and Kamen Rider Ryuki. For the Reiwa eras, it was 01 and Geats. And I know I didn't even talk about all the crossover movies and whatnot, but maybe I'll save that for another video, who knows. Alright then, thank you all so much for watching this video, I really do appreciate it. The next video should be coming out real soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and tune in next time for something completely different. Peace.